Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live in the Get Unstuck series with myself, Sarah Archer. I am a career and leadership coach, and if you haven't joined me before on one of my lives, you are very welcome. I work predominantly with female leaders to help them create the kind of career success that means they don't have to sell out or get burnt out because they can be authentic and they can get the reward and the recognition that they deserve. And I created the Get Unstuck series to talk about career topics that are pertinent for female leaders, to give you a bit of space, about 15 minutes in your busy week, just to have the chance to think about things that might be going on for you in your leadership career and to get some ideas, some inspiration, some support to help you navigate those so you don't stay feeling stuck. And so they're every Wednesday at 12:15, and they're always very practical. They'll definitely be something you can take away and put into practice straight away. And today's topic is all about how to move past negative experiences at work. And I have to apologise because this was meant to go out last week, but I wasn't very well. You might be able to hear from my voice. I've had a really horrendous kind of chesty cold and sore throat. So I'm hoping I'm not going to have a coughing fit today. So I had to reschedule it for today. So if you were coming along last week and you're now here this week, thank you very much for staying with me. So the topic today, you're probably lucky in your career if you haven't had, sadly, a negative experience at work, because they're becoming a little bit more, and sadly, commonplace. And so it is important to have a process, a strategy for dealing with them if you have had a negative experience. And if this is going on for you at the moment, if you're in the midst of a negative experience at work, or you've had one recently, or you've had one in the past that you haven't dealt with, then you don't have to tell me about it, but just put a me in the comments. It's always really helpful to know who is kind of working through some of this at the moment. And obviously I can, get in touch and send you more resources if that's helpful. So the reason I thought about this as a topic was because I was working with a client recently, and she was thinking about her next leadership role, and she was definitely ready for stepping up into that next role. And so we were looking at her positioning, we were looking at her advancement strategy, and what I noticed was that her commitment to it, there was kind of resistance around it. She wanted it, but actually the kind of taking action and moving forward with it was there's definitely kind of resistance going on. And when we unpacked it together, we realized that there was a negative experience that she'd had in a kind of very recent job that she was worried about that was going to happen again, and that was stopping her from actually moving forward with her strategy. And I'll tell you a bit about what we did later on. So I mean, the negative experience at work, it's going to be very personal, and everyone will have something potentially different has maybe created a block for them, or is kind of holding them back. Some of the things I've seen with clients are things like having a micromanager, a very stressful experience if your manager is not trusting you, particularly in a kind of leadership management role, to get on and do your job, and is expecting you to be constantly updating them or feeding back to them or telling them what you're doing, and you don't feel like you're trusted. That can be a really negative experience for you. So there's that. There's also things around performance. So if maybe in your first 90 days in a new job, you haven't been confirmed in your probation, or you've decided to leave early because it wasn't working out, or in your existing role, you've been put under some kind of performance management, either informal or formal, that can be a really negative experience to move past. I've also seen clients, obviously, who've had burnout. That's a very negative experience, or where redundancy has been really badly handled by the employer. I recently had a client who didn't have enough work for her and her team, and that was causing her to really doubt herself and impact her confidence, and that was a really negative experience. It's really bringing her down. And then you've also got the things like, a manager who can't manage well or has a very different leadership style to you, or a nasty colleague or client, or a toxic culture, can all contribute to you having a negative experience at work. And what happens is that this can then affect us in very different ways. So it can mean that you end up holding yourself back, so a bit like my client, where you're not being wholehearted about moving forward into either a new role or being wholehearted in your existing role, which can then affect your performance. Then it can be a fear that it's going to be happening again and it stops you moving. Because you might think, oh, there's a pattern here. Maybe why am I having this experience? What's the chances of it happening again? It could be better to stay with what I know than go into something new where, I could be in a worse situation. Or you might start to feel, I don't want to be vulnerable, so I'm going to put some walls up. You might not even be conscious that you're doing this, which stops you connecting and engaging with people around you. Or you might develop kind of hypervigilance where you're scanning constantly for potential risk that this thing is going to happen again. Or you might find yourself ruminating on what's happened. You might be replaying conversations or situations in your head over and over again, overthinking what's going on. Or you might find it hard to show up as you. You might find yourself showing up differently. So that could be in your existing work, or it could be if you're going for a new role. Showing up at interviews as the standout candidate can be hard because career confidence can be felt, and it can be read by people around you. So if you're doubting yourself or you're fearing something, that can come through in terms of how confident you are in your job, or if you're going for an interview. And also it can give you a legacy that you can take into your next role in terms of a way of being. Particularly in, say, we take the micromanagement example. If you've had to adjust your style to suit that micromanager, you're likely to take some of that way of being into your next role, and that's going to impact your performance. So there's lots of things to think about in terms of how this negative experience is impacting you, some of which you might not even be super aware of until you start to dive into it. Now, obviously, it can be tempting to just kind of brush it off and just think, I've moved past it. I don't want to think about it. I just want to kind of move forward. But actually, what we need to do is we do need to unpack it, dissect it, and process it, and learn from that experience so that we can get something called cognitive closure. Because otherwise, it's a bit like a scab, you can probably remember from childhood, that you go back and you keep picking, and it doesn't heal. So we need to be able to do that processing piece. And sometimes you can do this on your own. Sometimes you might want to do it with somebody that you trust, or sometimes you might want to do it with somebody professionally, to get perspective on what's happened and to see the things that have contributed to it that you can then choose to either leave behind or you can do differently moving forward. So what I'm going to encourage you to do if you've had a negative experience is not just to feel like I just want to move past it, but actually take some time and to think about it and to process it. So you can ask yourself things like, what can I learn from this situation or this experience? What did I contribute to that happening? Because there might be something that you have done that you want to then change going forward. So maybe you felt like I wasn't assertive in that situation, and therefore that's something that I want to work on going forward. Or you could think about, what was happening in that environment that didn't enable me to be at my best in that situation. Are there certain environments that actually aren't right for me that I need to avoid in the future? Or are there particular personality types that don't align with me, that I don't respond well to, that maybe I need to be aware of if I'm making choices about different organisations I work in, or different managers or leaders that I work for? And similarly, was the culture aligned to me? Are there cultures that really enable me to thrive? Maybe thinking about previous roles or organisations that you've worked in. And then asking yourself, what would you do differently next time? So that you're really kind of learning from that experience, but also understanding what you do differently next time gives you a strategy, so that if you're going into a situation where there could be similarities, you know you can handle it in a different way next time, which helps to boost your confidence around moving forward. And then to kind of just get some perspective, because sometimes when we've had a negative experience, we can start to blame ourselves and think, oh gosh, it was all me. If I hadn't acted this, if I hadn't said that, if I hadn't done this. But actually getting the perspective, and that's where it can be helpful to have another person in that kind of review situation, that analysis situation, to help you see the perspective about what is actually going on for you, and enabling you to think about, what do I want to leave behind? What do I want to actually let go of? Which might be about, being compassionate to yourself and not assuming that actually you did something wrong or you were in the wrong, but understanding perhaps the way that person acted towards me was actually as a result of their particular situation, their personality preferences, the culture in the organisation. So just getting that perspective, and then actually thinking about having a releasing ritual. And that's what I did with the client that I mentioned earlier. Once we kind of done that processing and she got that learning from the experience, we then did a releasing ritual, so she could be really sure that cognitively she had dealt with it and she'd moved forward. And there are lots of different releasing rituals that you can undertake, and it's about working out what works for you, to make sure that you feel, okay, I've processed it, I've learned from it, and I'm now ready to move on, and I'm not going to take it forward with me. So, and I've got a little example to illustrate this from my experience. So when I was an HR director, I worked for a CEO who, I didn't realise this when I joined the organisation, but actually she was quite insecure. And so when I, in my HR director role, was trying to be proactive, I was trying to show initiative, she would actually sort of play psychological mind games with me, where she felt like I was trying to undermine her. And so I became really, really wary about how I presented things to her, how I showed initiative, whether I actually wanted to show initiative, and my language. I became kind of hyper vigilant about the language she was using, and it became a really stressful time for me because I felt like I couldn't be my authentic self, and it was starting to change my natural approach to how I would move things forward, how I would lead initiatives, how I would lead my department. And it became really difficult, and I probably would have left the organisation, but actually, luckily for me, she left before it got to that, and a new CEO came in who was very different, who was very open to people being proactive and showing initiative. And I could see, and I had to do some processing myself to actually recognise what was going on was really owned by that CEO and wasn't my fault. Although I did actually look at, was I triggering something for her? Was I presenting something in a way that actually was overstepping the boundaries of my role? So I did do that exploration, but then I was able to kind of let it go, so that with my relationship with the new CEO, I could show my true self in terms of my solution focus and my initiative. And I actually talked to that CEO about my previous relationship and what I needed from her in terms of her enabling me to step up and be the HR director that she wanted me to be, having had to sort of dumb down my natural style in my previous relationship. But if I hadn't done that processing, if I hadn't done that kind of thinking and that releasing, then I possibly could have gone into that new relationship with that CEO in a way that she wouldn't have seen the true HR director that I was. She wouldn't have seen my true performance. So it is recognizing that there is a danger to your career success if you don't process these things. So the processing definitely is the main thing to do, but there are a couple of other things that I can also recommend to you to think about doing as well. So particularly if you are going for a new role, perhaps you're wanting to leave your current role because of the negative experience. Once you've done that processing piece, it's also to just get practice talking about your job for, you know, potential interviews, because you don't want to be in an interview and be triggered by something that means you then start talking about your role negatively. So you want to kind of be able to practice being able to talk confidently about what you did in that role positively without letting that negative experience kind of have power over you. And hopefully, if you've done the processing well, it'll be much easier to then do that practice around your interview narrative. And then the third thing you can do is to use a technique called positive reminiscence, because this comes from the positive psychology community. And what we tend to do, obviously, as our brains tend to focus on the negative. You might have heard me say previously, you know, we have to have 4 positives to balance out 1 negative. So if your negative experience is colouring your experience at that previous organisation or your current organisation, is to spend some time doing some positive reminiscing. Oh, can't say that word. By savouring moments and really engaging with moments that you have enjoyed in that job or in that organisation. There will be some. So there'll be colleagues that you've enjoyed working with. There might be projects that you've enjoyed being part of. There might be, you know, things you've done with your team that you've really enjoyed. So it's also kind of spending some time really noticing the positive experiences that you can savour that will help boost your feeling about the work experience that you've had, so that negative experience doesn't colour the whole time that you were there in your organisation. So just to kind of recap, so just to recognise that if you have had a negative experience, either in the past or currently, if you're having one, that you do need to support yourself by doing some processing of that experience, either on your own, with somebody or with a coach, to help you get the perspective that you need to be able to kind of let go of the unhelpful stuff and know that you can move forward positively and it not impact your confidence. So remember all those kind of ways that it can impact you, which we don't want to happen. And then the other things you can do is to practice talking about your role, your interview narrative, so that you are able to convey positively the things you've done in that role where you've had impact, and not let it be covered by the negative experience or be triggered by it in an interview. And the third thing is to think about using positive reminiscence to get some balance into that particular work experience that you had. So I hope that's been useful if you are experiencing something negative at the moment. Obviously, if you want to have some coaching around the negative experience and being able to kind of release what's happened and be able to move forward positively and advance your career positively, then do message me and we can book in a career breakthrough call to help you with that. And you know, do join me next week. I'll be back next Wednesday. I haven't decided on the topic I'm going to be talking about next Wednesday. So if you've got ideas, please message me of things you might like me to talk about. But I'll be back next Wednesday, 12:15, to talk about another career topic that will help you in your career. Have a great rest of the week, and I will see you next week.